He says, Conjectural Emendations. Since we, compared to the New Testament, lack the same abundance of textual support for the text of the Tanakh, should we as believers be open to conjectural emendations, alterations to the text which have no manuscript support, to the consent text of the Hebrew Scriptures? Having worked my way lately through Deuteronomy 33, 1 through 5, it seems to me that we must resort to this practice at times. What are your thoughts on this issue?
Well, let me just start it off here. The idea that we don't have a lot of manuscripts, okay, that in comparison to the apostolic scriptures, that's true. On the other hand, we have very, very early manuscripts. I mean, we have Deuteronomy in the Qumran scrolls. That's far earlier than what we have of any of the apostolic scriptures. We also have the Septuagint, and we have it in various versions, I grant. But we have the Septuagint, which by all data available was extant in the first century BCE, at least of the Torah. And we know that because we have some of the Septuagint in the Qumran scrolls, even if it seems to have some divergence with the later Septuagint as we find it in the great codices of Sinaiticus and Alexandrinus and so forth, Vaticanus. But my point simply is this: if we take the Masoretic text that was maintained and only written down in the 5th, 6th century, but nonetheless seems to have been maintained. We can see quotations from, for instance, Paul sometimes quotes not the Septuagint, but he quotes Hebrew text. What he quotes seems to be what the Masoretic text has almost entirely, not always, but close. So if we take the Masoretic text, we put it against whatever Qumran evidence we have, we put it against the Septuagint. When we find all three of them matching up, I think that's a pretty good witness to saying, okay, we should take that. Now, if we find a Septuagint and Qumran agreeing against the Masoretic text, then I think we have good textual grounds to say, let's consider this alternate reading. You know, for instance, as in Isaiah 53:11, where it says, and he will see light and be satisfied. Okay, so Qumran has light, Septuagint has light, and Masoretic text doesn't. I take it to be resurrection. He will see light and be satisfied. Okay, so then I would say I think the NIV, for instance, is correct in putting that in their English text and putting a footnote saying that the Masoretic text doesn't have the word light. I'd like to see more of the English translations take the weight of textual criticism, of the textual criticism, and put it in. But in terms of conjectural, like we're gonna think something's missing here, so we're gonna add it. I really think I think we're on soft ground on that.
I think if I might share a few comments along those same lines. One bigger problem that Parr points out here is what is the place of conjecture in the body of Messiah? Right. I mean, let's not even be specific that we're talking about text. Just the nature of conjecture itself, we have to be careful, and particularly now that we're on the other side of the tetrad of blood moons, the John Hagees, of the world, and all his posse in the big movie that they produced, and then the 923 thing came and went, and we've seen it. How many times we have to be careful when people are speculating and conjecturing and building. Basically what it is, it's building on sand. Yeshua said build on rock. And we want to learn to do that. We want to build on the rock of the Word and to not build on sand. And that's kind of our own ongoing trajectory of our education as disciples of Yeshua, as we learn more and more where the rock is. We get more and more sure of where the rock is and strengthened in that. And then we sometimes by trial and error, sometimes by wisdom that we get from others, we learn, I was on sand there and I didn't realize it, and I'm going to happily cease my building project that was on the sand. So that's one thing that I think people out there could write a few books on, the place of speculation and conjecture. Now, back to the specific point that Parr makes with respect to conjecture as to our Tanakh tradition. Tim, you brought up the Isaiah 53. One that we encountered here in our reading and 3-year cycle is in Deuteronomy 32, where I think it's verse 8. It says, "Lemispar b'nei Yisrael," according to to the number of the children of Israel. But another example, the Dead Sea Scrolls preserves b'nei Elohim, not b'nei Yisrael, b'nei Elohim there. And I think the Septuagint has something closer to that, like angeloi theou, or angels of God.
Yeah, and the Septuagint often use angelos as a substitute for
ben Elohim, or
yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah, so and I'm of the same opinion, Tim. I believe that you were sharing is that I think it's on us to be good stewards of our inheritance in terms of what extant manuscripts we have from the ancient world. We want to preserve what we have. We have nothing to hide.
Right.
We don't need to try to sweep any things under the rug because our God is a God of truth, is a big part of who we are, and we want to use just weights and measures. So in some of these instances, we preserve the dilemma in a way. It's on us to be honest with what we have, preserve the variance, and let that be part of our conversation. Let us understand that the fragmentation of God's people happened a long time ago.
Yeah.
And that that's part of our confrontation with the fact of the matter, with the reality of the matter, is that we have been fragmented and separated, and we are waiting for him to come and help us with these things. Now the last point, I guess, was concerning emendations. Now that's where we get into who was it? There was a famous Jewish 20th century Jewish scholar who wrote on the Psalms. He had all manner of emendations of the Psalms according to study of Ugaritic texts and other things. And is it Dawood?
Yeah. I think I know who you're talking about.
Dahoud, maybe. Dahoud. I don't remember. But anyway, I think we need to be really careful, because what happens is someone gets a little pet theory. Now we come full circle back to the place of speculation and conjecture generally in the body of society. Someone gets their pet symbol they like to hit, or their pet theory, and they find it everywhere. It's under every rock.
Yeah.
And they can change, well, this should be this, and this should be this, and there's no control, no constraints for that.
Yeah, I think you were talking about Mitchell Dahoud.
Dahoud.
Yeah, his three volumes on the Psalms, and I'd like when we were studying the Psalms in seminary days, we used his 3-volume commentary. It's in the Anchor Bible commentary, and we always chuckled that he's kind of what we called a pan-Ugarist. In other words, if he found something in Ugaritic that could in any way be squeezed into the Psalms, he did it. Yeah. So I'm just the issue that we have is just like you're saying. What has amazed me is that take for instance Islam. They refuse to accept the idea that the Quran could ever have had variant readings. I mean, that's just unthinkable to them. And so you don't find a critical edition of the Quran where you have manuscripts that vary, that have different readings being noted, in a footnote or something like that. But the same thing you have going on with the Mishnah. Why is it that there's no critical edition of these? Why don't we have textual criticism of the Mishnah? Now, I know in modern times that's being worked out by some scholars, and there is a German work that did that, but it's not accepted even by modern day or Orthodox rabbis and so forth, because there's this idea that somehow, since it was given at Sinai, it has to be preserved letter by letter or whatever, or that if we allow the idea that, well, maybe we have a variant reading that somehow it diminishes our authority. What I really liked what you said, Rob, was that, as believers in Yeshua, we want the facts. We're willing to live by the facts, and as President John Adams said, facts are stubborn things. And so we want the facts. But when we look at the facts, we recognize that they substantiate what we're saying. And the last thing I'll say here is that I just quickly looked at Deuteronomy 33, 1 through 5, which our friend Parr was referring to. And granted, it's fragmentary, but every fragment that has any part of these verses in Qumran is exactly what the Masoretic text has. And even if you look at Emmanuel Tov's book, and I don't know him personally, but I don't understand that he is necessarily a staunch conservative kind of a person when he's looking at biblical things. But in his work, he shows the data that says the largest complete manuscript that we have from Qumran, which is Isaiah, the Isaiah scroll, you put it up next to the Masoretic text, and the vast majority of differences are in spelling or in those kinds of mistakes that are easily seen, that a word is left out at the end of a line or repeated at the next line, and that kind of a thing. So, he substantiates the fact that the Masoretic text which we have now is in Isaiah as a test case is essentially the same as what we have in Qumran. And so I just looked at the first 5 verses of Deuteronomy 33, and every word that we have extant in the Qumran fragments is there in the Masoretic text exactly the same. So that itself, I think, would be some kind of an indication that the copying process was done with real rigor for accuracy.
Read your Bible as interpreted by experts.